The future is coming, ready or not, and I prefer, and I think most people prefer, that we be ready for it. And that means assuring that we have the people with the skills for the jobs, not just of today, as critical as that is, but of tomorrow, and anticipating that rather than trying to catch up, as we so often do. Industry is evolving rapidly, and we want to be ready for it. And you don't have to be a Democrat or Republican to understand that being ready for it means caring about and preparing the workforce.
For a while, we had a really good conversation going in this country about the American workforce, about what works and what doesn't in education. And now, ironically, as we've learned more and more about what really works in education, there's far less discussion on the political level, whether it be executive or legislative branch, about how we make certain that actually happens in our schools. And we see the results of that. We saw some disastrous NAEP results come out recently. And we know that all translates into people not being ready for the workforce. So this is that critical issue that unfortunately we're not talking about anymore. While the right and left are far apart on so many issues, this is one of those, making certain that everyone, regardless of income level, regardless of background, has an equal opportunity to have a shot at a great job. You know, where are you going to find the political difference in that? Now let's go talk about how we do it. And that's why I'm excited about this commission. We're going to talk about how you actually do that.
BBC created the Commission on the American Workforce to bring together stellar leaders from across the continuum, because we know that our economy can't grow, our country can't prosper unless we all come together around the talent pool of our citizens. That's why we're here. We all share a belief that without a high-quality education, you cannot be successful in work, in life, in your community, as a citizen. And that's something that we all share, and why we're working so hard on these issues, to bring urgent action around the needs of the American people.
Almost every time you see an analysis of the future of American prosperity, it begins with the realities of having a trained, capable, productive workforce. And that's true not only at the national level, but it's cities and counties and states, everybody pulling together to get the maximum we can from the quality of our workforce. This is the main play for our country. And our economy will only suffer, our competitive position will suffer, if we don't work hard to generate the absolute best workforce that we can.
To our second event in the America's Workforce Solutions Beyond the Gridlock series. This series is designed not only to offer, hopefully, valuable insights to all of you, but also to inform the work of the Commission on the American Workforce and its recommendations. The goal of the Commission is to develop a talent strategy for the nation and a comprehensive set of policy recommendations designed to strengthen our workforce, expand economic opportunity, and ensure our continued competitiveness. Before we get started with our first conversation, I wanted to just mention that we have received a lot of audience questions, and in order to maximize our time with our speakers, we will not do live Q&A today, but we have done our best to incorporate those questions throughout the program discussions. So let's go ahead and get started. In April, President Trump signed an executive order meant to modernize federal workforce programs. He asked agencies to perform a top-to-bottom review of their workforce programs and find ways to improve and streamline those programs to better suit the needs of our economy today and into the future. After that review, agencies were asked to create a report outlining a new national workforce strategy. We're so grateful to have two of the agency officials leading that charge with us here today. Dr. Casey Sachs is a senior policy advisor on workforce and AI at the U.S. Department of Education. She is also the president of Bridge Valley Community and Technical College and founder of the Wynn Academy Early College Charter High School in Charleston, West Virginia. Dr. Sachs previously served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Colleges at the U.S. Department of Education, where she led work related to workforce development, career and technical education, adult education, and prison education. She was an Aspen Institute Presidential Fellow in the inaugural class and earned a PhD in higher education administration from Bowling Green State University. And Taylor Stockton. Taylor is the Chief Innovation Officer of the U.S. Department of Labor. In his role, he leads DOL's exploration of how AI and emerging technologies impact the labor market and the overall experience of the American worker, as well as what new innovations can support workers in achieving the American dream. Taylor was formerly the co-founder of Future of Work venture capital firm Pathway Ventures and the chief operating officer of an AI-powered workforce development company, and he received his MBA from Harvard Business School. Casey and Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we jump right into the EO itself, I wanted to sort of set the stage, or ask you all to set the stage for our audience. This EO certainly did not come out of nowhere. It's responding to some big picture trends: an aging and shrinking population, rapid technological change driven by AI, declining student performance in core academic areas, and a need to sort of inventory the federal role, as was mentioned in the EO. So how have these and other trends affected education and workforce systems, and what challenges in those systems made it clear that this sort of broad review of programs was needed? I think I'll start with Casey, and then we'll let Taylor jump in.
I mean, I think you've covered a lot of the reasons, Cheryl, that when we look at the federal workforce system, it's really hard as an end user to figure out, where do I need to interact, whether that's as an employee, if it's a business, if it's an education institution, really trying to figure out how do you fit in and how do you do your job most effectively. It's challenging. You mentioned in my introduction, I also have the ability to serve as a college president, and my college has a dozen active workforce grants right now, and they're all from different federal agencies. And so just having one educational institution try and figure out, how are we the education service provider following a dozen different rules, can be really challenging. So it's fun for me to get to talk to my federal colleagues and hear them be excited about braided funding, to be excited about what's possible in terms of regulatory reform. But it's also really meaningful for an end user. When I see my students and when I see who's trying to access our workforce systems, it's painful to tell a student that they need to go to 3 other agencies to get the services that they need so that they can get the training to get the job. It's a lot more meaningful when we can help our students and help our learners really access all the services they need in one place and get employed, because that's what we're seeing so many people say they want.
Braided funding. Thank you. Taylor, do you want to make any comments?
Yeah, and I would say that could be its whole panel in itself. But I would just say, Cheryl, first of all, thanks for having us, and great to be with Casey in this conversation. I think, as she said, there are a lot of different challenges in the workforce system that we need to think about. But at its core, the fundamental challenge that we need to be thinking about is the fact that there's been a persistent mismatch between how we are training workers and what the needs of our employers are in the economy. And I think we've seen that for so long, but now more than ever, as we look at shifts like AI and how it's going to impact the economy, but also the president's bold economic agenda around reshoring and reindustrializing so many great industries in this country, as we take on those new challenges within our workforce, it's important now more than ever, I think, to make sure that mismatch is addressed, to make sure that we have the talent to actually pursue these different economic strategies.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I spent a minute or two at the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation, and certainly there wasn't a day that passed that the employer community wasn't noting workforce as a key challenge for them. And as you said, it's certainly time for all of us as stakeholders to really address that mismatch. Let's talk a little bit about the EO. So the EO tasked the Departments of Education, Labor, and Commerce with reviewing workforce programs. And I am certain everyone that's watching us today can appreciate the challenges of interagency collaboration, and working across the federal government is no small feat. But I wanted to first ask you if you can level set for the audience sort of where you are in the process of the work that you've been tasked with doing. And then we can talk about kind of how you went about it.
Jump in on that. If you read the executive order, there's a few deliverables in it. The things that constituents have been the most interested in are a workforce strategy. So that's a collaboration. Who we're missing on this webinar are colleagues from the Department of Commerce. So it's a collaboration between businesses, educators, and the group that represents workers. So we really want to make sure that everybody's at the table, and that's why this interagency group is so important. And the two deliverables that seem to be of most interest to folks, the first is around a broad workforce strategy, and then the second is around an apprenticeship strategy. There's certainly several coalitions who are specifically interested in how do we get 1 million more apprentices. So if you go back to the EO, all of that is due from us sometime in the beginning of September-ish. And so that's what our crew is working on right now to produce.
Fantastic. Thank you for the reminder to everyone sort of where we are. So how have you thought about the sort of what issues to prioritize as you've done this work, and why was it so important to have this kind of interagency collaborative effort? Taylor, do you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I would say it's particularly important that this is a joint effort between labor, commerce, and education, because one of the fundamental challenges underlying this, Cheryl, is that historically the workforce system has been fragmented and duplicative across many different federal agencies. And I think this administration felt strongly that if we are going to solve this problem and actually produce outcomes, it has to be a unified strategy. It has to bring together these critical agencies and not just say, what is the ideal system for one, but what is the ideal system for all, and what role do each of the different agencies play in that holistic dynamic? And as we think about, for example, critical industries where we do need to build robust talent pipelines, what role can labor play in that in terms of prioritizing registered apprenticeships and other programs that we have? What role can education play at that in terms of saying, how do we immerse those types of awareness to those industries within our middle school and high school educational systems? How can commerce play a role in making sure that as they are engaging with industry and different employers from that from that group, that they can take into account their needs? And so really thinking about this strategy as holistically as possible, I think, has allowed us to make sure that we're driving the outcomes that we know the system needs to see.
And I think I would add that we really talk a lot about the changing future of work, that Taylor early on brought up artificial intelligence, the technological changes that we're seeing right now and that we've seen in the past couple of years. I think they're really highlighting how true that is. AI just has such tremendous impact and potential to impact every single job I can name, and lots of jobs that I've never even thought of yet. And so figuring out, how do we create systems that work not just for business, not just for educators, not just for workers, but for all of us across the whole system in this context of the changing future of work, felt really important to our whole team and has been a big part of the conversation.
I appreciate you bringing that back to us. And I know from our work, from our Commission on the American Workforce that we've been sort of at for the past 6 months or so, that issue of kind of nimbleness of our systems and the ability to respond to a very dynamic economy, to, as you said, the technological changes is something that I think we can find bipartisan agreement around the fact that our current systems are not very nimble. And they're not able to sort of turn on a dime in the way that, and keep up with the pace of change, frankly. You both mentioned apprenticeships, as well as obviously we've talked about AI, and I want to get to both of those things. So, President Trump in his first term looked at kind of a new way to think about apprenticeships, prioritized apprenticeships again, as have previous administrations, both Democrat and Republican. How are you all, let's talk a little bit about apprenticeships and how is the administration thinking about maybe this issue a little bit differently than even in the first term, and how, how does that sort of connect to this conversation and the work that you all are doing?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I'm happy to start, and then it would be great to hear Casey's thoughts as well. But I think the first thing that the president did that was huge here was set a bold goal of 1 million new active registered apprenticeships. Because as you said, Cheryl, there have been administrations in the past that have poured hundreds of millions of dollars in this issue, but not seen the growth that we'd want to see. And so I think really having a successful strategy starts with the goal, but then it tasks our team to really think about what are the really ambitious ways that we can think about addressing some of the systematic barriers that have held back employer adoption of registered apprenticeships in the past. And so maybe to give you a sense of some of the questions that our team is thinking about that we do think is different than administrations have been in the past. One is just expanding beyond the types of apprenticeships that can really be successful. So one, for example, to new industries, right? If you look at the registered apprenticeship data today, it's still highly concentrated in only a couple industries. And we really think, especially as we see the different talent shortages across the economy, that this can be a highly effective solution and training model to talent shortages within healthcare, within tech, within AI infrastructure roles. And so we're thinking about what are the types of intermediaries, what are the types of infrastructure that are really needed to make some of these new types of apprenticeships and new types of industries possible for this overall approach. The second thing and last thing I would say on this point that we are thinking about quite strongly is how do we think about the value proposition for employers? If we want employers to adopt this in a sustainable way, it has to make sense for them. And while we think there's value there, we also think that there's opportunity to revisit what are the costs? What are the costs from a time perspective and from a burden perspective? And those are things that our team is taking very seriously in terms of, are there opportunities to reduce some of the burdensome processes that have historically been there while still protecting the safeguards that make sure that apprenticeships are high quality? And we think there is something to explore there. And so those are just a couple of the exciting areas that our team is looking into that we think is going to produce actual results.
I would love to, I don't know if there's anything more you can say on the intermediary piece. I think that is part and parcel to your second point, which is, the value proposition for employers, but making it I don't know, maybe an easier program for them to execute and to be involved in. And I think that intermediary piece will be really critical.
Yeah, maybe the further level of detail that I would share there, Cheryl, is, as you said, I think there is a spectrum of different employers. And while some may have the capability and the desire to build a registered apprenticeship system and all of the different parts of that process internally, we also recognize that there are many employers who do not have the capacity, who do not have the time, who do not have the desire to build those capabilities. And so we have seen that certain intermediaries can play a very effective role at supporting these businesses, especially, for example, as we think about small and medium-sized businesses, right? There may be certain capabilities, certain HR functions that very large corporations have that they can afford to spend additional times on some of these registration and compliance processes. But for small businesses, that's not always the case. And we do want to make this a model that can be effective regardless of the size of the business, because of how important small businesses are to our economy. Maybe the last thing I would say to this point, Cheryl, is that there is, I think, a distinction of high quality intermediaries. I think there have been investments by previous administrations in intermediaries that simply have not taken on the set of capabilities necessary to really drive results. And so I think the focus that you will see this administration take is really focusing on the high impact intermediaries that can actually make a dent in taking the work off employers' plate and actually making a meaningful improvement to adoption expansion of registered apprenticeships.
Thank you for that, Taylor. Casey, is there anything else you would add?
Asked about how do we prioritize the work around apprenticeship, and one of the things that we've consistently talked about is that there's no apprenticeship without an employer. And so how do we make the bar easier for employers? I was talking to an intermediary this morning, a school from Louisiana, who was saying they want all of their students to go through an apprenticeship because they've seen these just really astonishing academic outcomes for the kids who have been through the apprenticeship program. But what they're finding in their community is that there just aren't enough employers who are interested in doing apprenticeships. So trying to figure out, how do we incentivize that? How do we work with the governor's office to do that? And as we were brainstorming, it really brought to a head for me how important it is to have our colleagues from commerce right there at the table and talking about, how do we help promote this for you? How do we simplify registration? How do we support an intermediary if that is going to be, as Taylor said, what can really convince a small business that this is possible for them? How do we align program design with what the employers need? And so there are a lot of places that do this in fantastic ways, but it's, how do we scale it? And if we're talking about 1 million new apprentices, it really is featuring getting employers into the pipeline and thinking about new apprenticeable occupations.
Yeah, and I will just say, as somebody who serves on a board in the state of Virginia, and I know you're well aware, Casey, the desire for the state to have every post-secondary student have access to a work-based learning experience, should they choose to have one. And I think that is truly the biggest sort of, challenge that the state faces, is that, you can't have the experience without the employer. And I think, expanding what is acceptable under the work-based learning experience is probably how you get to those bigger numbers. But let's shift a little bit to AI, because that is certainly another executive order that the president issued, a couple of them, and a recent new AI action plan just released last week. How does the AI action plan connect to the workforce-focused executive order that we've been talking about today?
I'm happy to jump in and start on this one. I would say it's really exciting for both Casey and I, because in both of these different deliverables, I think AI and workforce are going hand in hand. And so obviously the AI action plan is now public. The workforce report is not at this point, but what you will see is that there's a remarkable degree of consistency in both deliverables of how intertwined these two elements around AI and workforce are. And so, as you mentioned, Cheryl, last week, the AI action plan came out and really made an argument that workers need to be central to an overall national AI strategy. But what you will also see in the workforce report when it is public is that we're also integrating how will AI reshape the labor market, and what are the types of supports and systems that need to be in place to really support workers. And so, yeah, first reflection would just be, these are things that go hand in hand. Maybe the last two things I would say is just focusing on a couple of the sections of that AI action plan that really did focus on workers. One was around, how do we empower American workers in the age of AI? The thing I want to call out there that I know we're really excited about the Department of Labor is the launch of the AI Workforce Research Hub. And I think what it gets to is, Cheryl, you mentioned this idea of nimble. How can you be nimble? And I think we sometimes use the word agility internally, but fundamentally it's the same thing of, we need to have more vehicles such as this research hub, but also others, that really allow us not to just make one shift to the economy, but really allow us to continuously monitor and identify what shifts are happening and what new types of models we might want to pilot through different innovative efforts to better support workers. And so that's one part of the action plan. The second that I would call out to make sure people don't miss is this this concept that comes on in the pillar around infrastructure, which is around, how do we make sure we're training a skilled workforce for AI infrastructure jobs? Because as we think about rapid expansion of data centers, et cetera, we cannot do that unless we have the talent pipelines for example, electricians, HVAC technicians, linesmen. And so I think what you saw in that action plan is how rigorously the Department of Education, the Department of Labor, the Department of Commerce are going to think about that specific issue and really develop a comprehensive framework and approach to make sure that those gaps are filled to really support our broader AI strategy.
There's a real connection here with the workforce EO in that we're thinking about how do we expand early career exploration? How do we help a pre-apprenticeship pipeline that helps engage middle school students all the way into high school and beyond, particularly as it relates to some of those AI infrastructure related careers that Taylor mentioned. We need 100,000 electricians today. That number is only going to continue to grow as our energy needs change. And so really helping students understand what the changing labor market looks like is an important part of planning and thinking about the future. We really want to provide on-ramps, and these really have to be into high quality registered apprenticeship programs. So all of this, the intersections are pretty incredible. And I think Taylor's enthusiasm shouldn't be understated, that we are really excited about the fact that the AI action plan dovetails so well with what we're thinking about in workforce development. In case everybody hasn't read it, there really are three main areas in the AI action plan. They're about innovation. So for the Department of Education, that's things like teaching and learning, and how do we encourage and promote the use of AI for all of our students and for all of our learners, and how can we customize instruction and be a lot more intentional. So there's a lot there in teaching and learning and what innovation can look like. There's building the AI infrastructure, and Taylor did a really good job kind of outlining that strategy. And then there's also leading in international diplomacy and security. And I don't think we can state enough times how competitive this is, that AI is a national security imperative for our country, and we need to treat it like it is, and to really be intentional about developing a workforce that can help protect all Americans. So I think those are worth highlighting. There's also a couple of things that you may have seen that have come out from the Department of Education that are really specific to the AI action plan. Our secretary issued a supplemental grant priority. And so if you're competing for a Department of Education grant for the next several years, we'll have a supplemental priority that'll give you extra points to include AI in your grant application. And we also have sent out a Dear Colleague letter to all of our current grantees, making sure that people know you can use current grant funds for AI related activities, because we do want to really encourage, if you already have an existing grant or you're not sure if this is a way that you could leverage Perkins, for example, it is. You can leverage Perkins this way, and we really want to encourage that.
I just want to say two things in response. This has been, appreciate both of you. One comment to you, Taylor, and these are just, I guess, personal point of privilege, I'll say, and just offer up the Bipartisan Policy Center as a partner in this work, as we're thinking about what are the kind of public policy potential solutions, things we can learn from the past, things that we need to be thinking about for the future when it comes to that worker supports piece, that safety net piece, right? What will happen to those dislocated, and what can we learn from maybe past mistakes or programs that didn't work so well? And then Casey, to your point about the teaching and learning, we've got a task force of about 20 teachers meeting down the hall this week from this event, and AI has come up several times, and I was just struck by the unevenness in its use, and what little sort of guidance or support, frankly, is given to teachers in the classroom on how to use. And so anyway, I love that as part of the action plan, and obviously so critical. Want to talk a little bit about AI literacy. So, why is sort of, AI literacy specifically so critical for building that, workforce that's prepared for the future? And then maybe, Casey, if you can speak a little bit to the AI challenge that I believe was announced today.
Taylor, you want to do literacy and I'll do the challenge?
That sounds great. I think what I would say, Cheryl, AI literacy for us represents the gateway to opportunities in the AI-driven economy. We really believe that we want to make sure all American workers and all American youth have the opportunity for all of the different benefits that we think AI will create in the economy, but we recognize that they won't be able to pursue a lot of those opportunities unless they have the foundational skills, the foundational curiosity, the foundational experience in engaging with these different types of AI tools that are increasingly out there. And so that's why you saw so much in the AI action plan, in the AI literacy executive order, and certainly will be the case in the workforce report, that we want to make sure that that is a priority across every single education workforce stream to make sure that these opportunities are as broadly accessible as possible to all Americans.
For anyone who's watching today who's brave enough to tell us that you haven't used AI, I would encourage you to try a platform, turn on something. I'm kind of platform agnostic. I certainly have my favorites for different things that I'm trying to do, but I've had a few colleagues this week tell me that they were brave enough to say, I have no idea what you're talking about when we talk about AI. And so that for me is AI literacy, that they're brave enough to say, I'm not literate right now about artificial intelligence, and I want to learn more and I want to do better. And the best way I know to help you, especially as an adult learner who's trying to learn a new skill, is to have you turn it on and start using it in any number of ways, you can think of for your work. Just try it. And that's the beginning of your own AI literacy pathway. The AI challenge is actually a presidential challenge. If you haven't gone to ai.gov, I have to plug it. We're really excited about the website. It's a terrific source of just information. The AI action plan that we keep talking about is on there. Several different initiatives from a variety of agencies. There's, I don't know, 7 different cabinet secretaries who are on the AI presidential committee, and they're really thinking intentionally about this. It's a pretty fantastic group. This presidential challenge is a project that has emerged from the presidential AI task force. It's an opportunity for K-12 students and educators to compete to demonstrate how AI can help solve some of our country's toughest problems. So there's 3 different tracks. You can participate as a student solving a problem. You can participate as a student group or group who actually wants to design AI. And so that's a great way to sort of get into how should we have an AI model that can do whatever it is you can think of. And there's also an educator track. So there's lots of ways to participate, and there will be a winning team from every state, and then we'll do regional, and then we'll bring groups to DC so that people will have the opportunity to meet the president and some cabinet secretaries and really be recognized for their great work. I don't think I can emphasize enough how excited we are about it.
Well, I can't believe I'm going to say this, but we've, I think, run out of time on this panel, and I actually have more questions. So I just want to thank you both so much for being here. It's clear that you guys have had your hands full and you're doing amazing work, and we will follow closely as your recommendations and reports become public in the fall. And again, just offer our, partnership and support as you, begin to take this to the implementation phase. Thank you so much, Casey and Taylor. Now we have a panel to discuss the state perspective on federal workforce programs and give us some insight into how state practitioners are thinking about the executive order. And so I want to quickly introduce our expert panelists. We have Katie Spiker, the Chief of Federal Affairs at the National Skills Coalition, and Brad Turner-Little, the President and CEO of the National Association of Workforce Boards. And moderating today's discussion is my dear friend, Allison Griffin, trustee at Colorado Mesa University, a member of the Colorado K-12 Accountability Task Force, and a valued member of our commission's post-secondary pathways working group. And with that, I will turn it over to Allison to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Cheryl. And thanks to the Bipartisan Policy Center for its leadership in launching the Commission on the American Workforce. It was also really great to hear directly from our administration colleagues today. I'm Allison Griffin, and I'll be the moderator for our conversation with Katie and Brad. But before we get started, I just wanted to offer 2 quick reflections on the reasons why I'm excited for today's conversation. As Cheryl mentioned, I have the pleasure of serving on the Post-Secondary Pathways Working Group as part of the Commission's work. And the Commission is really laying essential groundwork for future policy change by identifying some of the structural barriers in our education to employment pipeline, and also highlighting the urgent need for better coordination between education institutions and industry partners. This is work that is also underway in my home state of Colorado. We call it the Big Blur, and through Governor Polis's recent executive order, stakeholders across the state and in the broad advocacy space are beginning to look across our state to create the necessary framework for alignment across education, workforce, and economic development through a statewide talent system. Coloradans have realized that the real success in launching a talent system really depends on fostering authentic partnership between education providers, employers, and workforce development agencies at the local level. So, of course, I'm really excited for today's conversation about what Katie and Brad are observing in states where they're doing their work. But before we get into our discussion, Brad and Katie, welcome. Would each of you give us a quick overview of your organization? Brad, we'll start with you and then we'll move over to Katie.
Sure thing. I was going to defer to my good friend Katie, but happy to do so. I thank you to the Center for the invitation to be in today's conversation, a really important one. Brad Turnalillo, President and CEO of the National Association of Workforce Boards, or NAWB for short. You don't have to say it the whole thing each time. We serve, support, and represent the 580 local and state workforce boards all across the country. These are entities in every community, in all the states and counties, and actually even in the territories, that are majority business-led organizations that build strategies for how to help talent and business come together more efficiently and more effectively so that people can achieve what you would consider to be sort of life-sustaining wages, businesses can find talent, and economies can really be vitalized. So that's who we are here at NWB, based in our nation's capital, where we're having a record heat day today. I think it's super hot here in Washington, but based here in DC, but serve organizations all across the country. Katie?
The National Skills Coalition, we believe and see and hear some of the same things that we've already heard discussed on the call today, that jobs that require skills training really are the backbone of our economy. We fight for a national commitment to inclusive, high-quality skills training so that more people have access to a better life, and so more local businesses can see that sustained growth. The way we do this work is by building networks. So we work with a business network of over 500 small and mid-sized businesses called Business Leaders United. We have a group and a network of workers and grassroots skills advocates through our Voices for Skills network, and we engage these networks to craft policy proposals and then mobilize them to advance and move forward those policy proposals.
Your organizations are both doing important work. Thank you so much, Brad and Katie, for your leadership and for joining us today. To lay a foundation for our conversation and to help our audience understand the scope of workforce efforts, could you each give us a very quick overview? And I know that is a bit of a challenge because there are so many, but a quick overview of the programs that we're talking about today. Generally, how they function and which agency oversees them. Katie, would you take a first stab at that, and then we'll turn over to Brad.
Yeah, although Brad might be the better one to start that one with. I'll say my piece, which is at National Skills Coalition, we work closely with NAWB as well as other national organizations that represent different constituencies within what we call the workforce development system. And because of that, and because of our mission, we really take a broad view of the kind of programs and policies that we focus on. So we work on, and I think that into the bucket of workforce programs, we consider things that the Department of Education is administering around how we're supporting people's access to training, also programs that help the holistic supports that someone needs to move through that training successfully and get a job. We look at and obviously work with folks that are also part of Brad's coalition, the workforce boards, the apprenticeship programs, programs that are administered under departments of labor that bring together some of the capacity that works really closely with Department of Education. And then the third piece, one that we've already talked a little bit about today, are that there are really important programs under Departments of Commerce and the U.S. Department of Commerce that bring together these partnerships of industry that really help drive the work forward.
Yeah, I'll just expound a little bit. Katie, you did a great job of laying the groundwork. The workforce system, as Taylor and Casey in the first panel articulated, it really is comprised of that ecosystem is comprised of a variety of federal and state and even arguably local initiatives and programs. There are workforce programs not only in labor and education and commerce, they're in housing and urban development, they're in USDA, they're in the Department of Veterans Affairs, so they're Department of Justice. So they're all in lots of different places. And I think one of the observations when you sort of pull back and look at the workforce system is that it has an appearance of fragmentation. Within the system, I think you see a great deal of effort of sort of a recognition that there is bespokeness and that there's a difference in that. And those places that really recognize that we have different spokes on a wheel and come together effectively and build strategies. Allison, I'm not doing this just because you're based in Colorado, but I think Colorado is a really great example where local ecosystem, state sort of directive policy guidance, governor's office, there's real power and alignment there where you can do innovative experimental things that's trying to move everybody in a direction. And I think that's one of the intentions for those who are watching today's session, may be a little bit familiar with workforce policy. The core central piece of federal policy is called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which predecessor was the Workforce Improvement Act, which was which was before JTBA, Job Training Partnership Act, and there was CETA. But there's this one piece of policy, and in Katie and I discussions earlier, we're talking about the fact that this policy framework attempted to create a place where the programs could come together and think strategically together. And in some markets, that's really happened effectively. In others, it hasn't happened as effectively, I think, as was intended. But that's one of the both challenges and opportunities that our ecosystem faces in this moment, is that we have various programs. We actually do have a mechanism for them to come together. It's just the ability and the wherewithal to actually come together, have those kinds of strategic conversations, understand the things that Casey and Taylor were talking about in the first panel, and build things together. And that, I think, is when you see the formal big WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act program sort of operating at its best, is when those things come together and you're operating at a strategic level.
So thank you, Brad, and thank you, Katie, for the overview. As you were each describing the federal workforce programs, we use the word fragmented, siloed, but also bespoke. And I'm just wondering, how did we get here? So how did we get to a place where we do have these initiatives, these programs across different places? Katie, I'd love for you to reflect on that. But Brad, I would love for you to reflect on how that piecemeal approach may have affected, or how does it affect practitioners on the ground? So Katie, if you just give us a little bit of the historical, how we got here, and then Brad, I'd love to hear that practical application at the local level.
I think that there's a few things. There's several policy decisions that we made in this country over the past 50 years that have contributed to getting us to where we are in the workforce front. I think the first is there are different programs and different agencies in large part because there's not enough investment that we're putting into the program through WIOA, which Brad mentioned, or to support workers' needs or businesses' hiring needs. And that's really out of connection with where the general public wants Congress to be focused. So we did public perceptions polling last year and found that across parties, ideologies, demographics, people overwhelmingly, on average 85% of folks, want to see more public investment in skills and in skills training. And that comes 93% of Democrats, 82% of Republicans. So we're talking about significant support for more investment in the programs that help people train for jobs, in the programs that help bring together businesses, particularly the small businesses that Taylor was highlighting earlier in the conversation, and then the policies that help these programs work together. I think that there absolutely needs to be a better connection between the programs that are administered under the different agencies. I think some of the pieces that we heard discussed in the first half of this conversation are really the top line of what we're hearing from our network too. I think that underinvestment, though, has led states and local areas and then advocates at the federal level to advocate for more dollars to help support these really critical programs in whatever way we can in order to get the services to the workers and to the businesses that really need it. And I think that while this issue has been a bipartisan issue of support both among the public and members of Congress, one of the things that we really have an opportunity to do to shift and to make a difference for workers, businesses, local communities now is to actually invest behind that and to make sure that members of Congress are using capital and elevating this to a top tier issue.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, I mean, Katie speaks very eloquently. I mean, that's been one of the core central issues, certainly within the Workforce Board world, is diminishing investments over time. But also a part of your question, Allison, and I briefly referenced the sort of the 101 very quickly of the evolution of federal policy, dating all the way back to the Manpower Act. But embedded in almost all of those pieces of policy was an understanding that, just like politics, work was at the time local, and so you built out these local infrastructures to be able to support local businesses in a specific geographic area. Well, now we know that, I mean, our economies operate fundamentally differently than that now, right? Labor sheds are very different. People commute and move. I mean, there's people that live in New York and work here in DC on a regular basis, right? You can live in Moscow, Idaho, and work for a company based in Tullahoma, Tennessee. So that's really different. And one of the things that we're, within the Workforce Board world that we're talking a lot about and thinking hard about and actually have experimentation happening is an understanding that the change in our economy has well outpaces the evolution of the system. And so the opportunity that we have in front of us is, how do we narrow that gap so that we can create mechanisms and systems and approaches within the public workforce system that enable it to respond? And I love the language that Taylor used in the first part of today's session around creating more agility within workforce boards, so that they can think regionally. They can think about the future of work, meaning that people are working for, people may be living in other states, working for companies that are based in their territories. Like it's a very different type of model. And it's one that I know boards are experimenting with, thinking hard about, and we're excited about the things that we're seeing happening on the innovation front within workforce boards. All of that said, I go back to reiterate Katie's point that the investment in that infrastructure is what can unlock it and really create value for communities, for businesses, and for all of our neighbors.
Thanks to both of you for your reflections. And Brad, thank you for giving us a little bit of a ground level view from the Workforce Board perspective. That's incredibly helpful. As I reflect on the conversation that we just had with our administration colleagues, thinking about the workforce development plan that is forthcoming, the executive orders that have already been issued, also the AI action plan that was issued last week. How do you see the EOs, particularly those around workforce, really shaping the dynamic between the federal government and the states? Brad, given the work that you have been doing at the local level, what reaction do you have to that question? And then Katie, anything else to add? Be glad to turn to you.
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Allison, and I really did enjoy that the first panel's discussion, and I'm waiting with bated breath for the final reports to be released. But the signaling I think that both Casey and Taylor did, and the things that you see in the AI for America report, they really they actually reinforce a lot of what we're hearing from state and local workforce boards, where we did some work. Katie did some, and the National Skills Coalition did some really, really powerful research over the last year and a half around sort of public perception and investment. And she mentioned that in an earlier comment. Earlier this year, we did some really hard listening with workforce leaders across the country, thousands of input points around how are they navigating this moment, and what are their sort of how do they shape their aspirations moving forward to have greater impact. And the number one thing that was on the minds of workforce board leaders was, how do we more effectively leverage emerging technologies and AI? Right. So I mean, it's not like there's this sort of sudden revelation, right? This is, I think, another. So the administration's report is another catalyst for us as the public workforce system to really lean in and think hard and begin the process of innovating around how does AI change the way that the business operations within our public workforce system? How does it change the way we think about career pathing and job seeker experience? How does it change the way that businesses interact with labor market information? How does it change the way that we think about our data systems differently and the kinds of information that we need to make better decisions? So it's top of mind for workforce leaders across across the country, across the nation. So I think it just gives another sort of strong impetus to continue not just thinking about it, but really beginning the experimentation and the action in it, so that we can build things that can really create greater impact. Katie, I welcome your additional thoughts.
Absolutely. I think, the executive order on skilled jobs had really kind of 4 key themes that it asked the agencies to look at. Workforce system efficiency. On that point, I think it's important to include the comments that Brad's making around the role of the boards in this. The workforce system is really broader even than our public workforce system or workforce boards, right? So anything that's going to add to efficiency is going to need to bring in and enable those cross-agency connections that Taylor and Casey were talking about. And we see some states doing that in a really innovative and forward-looking way. We talked earlier about the work that's happening in Colorado that would bring together the education and the workforce agencies and workforce focus. That kind of focus on making sure that the systems are interacting and able to report out and align data and reporting, the other priority under the executive order, I think is really critical. The other 2 priorities we see there are strengthening apprenticeship and then bolstering tech, AI, manufacturing. I think all of these really hit on what we are hearing consistently from our partners and are really important moving forward. To get a little bit more detail on how those are actually going to come to fruition, given the realities of how work gets done today and what workers need. I think one thing that's important to look at as far as where that state role and the connection with what we've heard out from these executive orders come in is first, in the recent one bill, Congress passed an expansion of federal financing that goes to students that can help pay for these shorter term training programs than we're currently allowed. That implementation that brings together real equitable opportunity for people to pursue careers and jobs and training for things other than a 4-year degree is critical to making sure that all of this works together. At the same time, States are already spending over $6 billion on these shorter term credentials. And so it needs to be a true integration and alignment when we think about that new provision being able to provide some of this greater investment in workforce and skills training that's so important. Another thing that's happening simultaneous with that is that the one bill included massive changes and increased costs to states aligned with SNAP, Medicaid, and other basic needs programs. And that hole that we'll see from state governments is going to be critical both to making sure that investments continue to go to skills and education programs and making sure that they continue to go to the basic needs that people have, because basic needs are workforce needs.
Yeah, and I want to grab that real quick, Kate. Thank you so much for mentioning that. I'm sorry, Allison, you might have had another question teed up, but the point, Kate, you just made is absolutely essential. It's so critical to understand that the ability to leverage resources to respond to life things is essential for workforce programs and for a workforce ecosystem to truly be healthy. The official Department of Labor programs and ed programs and other private offerings around training or whatever in a community, but being able for individuals to be able to access resources for what we oftentimes refer to as wraparound or support services, life gets in the way for people. And having a mechanism and a path to be able to manage that so that you don't lose, you're not in a situation where you're going 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. Let's only go 1 step back, right? That's what those supports, they're absolutely critical. And I really, Katie, appreciate you raising that, because that's a part of this broader conversation about enabling individuals and communities to be able to move along a career pathway, to be able to build to the place where they have the assets necessary to be able to manage life independent of those kinds of resources. But they're just an absolutely essential part of this conversation. And so it's not just about skills training or competency development. It's a recognition that there's a broader view that needs to be had in order to support that individual to become the worker that he or she truly can become.
Absolutely. Thank you for your additional reflections and talking about steps forward or steps back. Hopefully, we're moving forward, and it feels like between this conversation and the one that happened previous to our discussion, that this is really the moment to be thinking about rethinking workforce and education systems. Really, this idea of redesigning or making more efficient and connected these systems. What is at stake if we don't act? I would love both of your responses to that question as we wrap up this discussion. Brad, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll end with Katie.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really significant question, and I really appreciate you sort of and one, like Taylor said on the first one, they could do a whole panel on that. We could do a whole session just on that. But I think what's at risk here, right, is quite candidly the ability for us, as for those who truly and deeply believe in the sort of the American dream for individuals. What's at risk here is that more kids are going to go to bed tomorrow hungry than do tonight. That's what's at risk, right? And we can solve for that, right? We can, the people being, skills mismatched, all those kinds of things are important pieces of what's at risk, our competitiveness as an economy, as a country, that's significantly at risk. But at its core, what drives me and what I'm most concerned about is the fact that, we have a situation where more kids could likely go hungry tomorrow than do today. And that's not satisfactory. That is absolutely not satisfactory. So, Kate,
an impetus to act. Thank you, Brad, so much. Katie, I'm going to give you the last word.
I'll start on the policy level. What's at stake right now is that we have an opportunity as advocates, as a community, building on the work that the BPC Commission is doing and that the community in general is doing to impact what our workforce and education systems look like for the next decade right now. WIOA, the law that covers and administers the workforce system is up for reauthorization. Current technical education programs are up for reauthorization. The impetus and implementation of these provisions that expand Pell Grants and financing create a really important opportunity for states to continue momentum that they have, and for the federal government to step up and be a real partner with the states and with businesses and with workers. On a human level, I think that really what's at stake right now is people being able to get the skills that they need to fill that job that the local manufacturing program has, or to be able to build out the AI tools that we need in order to educate K-12 students, because folks and adults have had access to the skills training that they need. What's at stake is business's ability to continue to prosper right now, and with this major shift in our economy. And I think that that is what's important about Bipartisan Policy Center, your leadership here, Allison, bringing folks together to have this conversation, because now more than ever is the time to act, advocate, and push forward what you all and the partners that NSC works with know is going to work.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your thoughtful contributions, Brad and Katie. What an engaging conversation. With that, Cheryl, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close us out.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Katie and Brad, Taylor and Casey. You've given us your time and, importantly, your expertise, and certainly appreciate the rich conversations. We hope you, the audience, is leaving here today with a better understanding of the administration's priorities around workforce, specifically apprenticeships and AI, as well as a deeper understanding of the breadth of the work underway across the country to meet the workforce needs of Americans. And the Commission on the American Workforce continues its work. We'll be drawing on insights like those shared today to help shape forward-thinking bipartisan policy recommendations, and we're committed to lifting up the voices of practitioners, researchers, and leaders who are advancing solutions in real time. We hope that you'll join us for future conversations. Our next one is scheduled for August 18th. Teed up nicely by this previous panel. I think that was an accident, where we'll discuss the recent expansion of Pell to short-term programs under the One Big Beautiful Bill. We're going to focus on the capacity and preparedness of states to implement. We'll hear from Louisiana and Connecticut about how they're approaching this Pell expansion, as well as from experts on the essential state-level data infrastructure that is going to be necessary. And so we hope that you'll join us then. And thank you again for being with us here today.